Happy Monday, everyone. John Lorden here with another episode of Brain Scratch, Case Cracked. Christy Arnhart has been hard at work again on another case to present to you guys today. Just want to give her a very big thank you. And before we jump into it, I want to let you know that Crawlspace has released a special episode, which is the presentation that we gave at the Cold Case Conference. That's the American Investigative Society Cold Case Conference that happened earlier this year. You can hear the whole presentation for yourself. Essentially, we were there to try to teach people why using social media can be helpful in cases, and started some very important dialogue about what could be put into place to help facilitate those connections between law enforcement and social media channels like us into place. So if you want to check that out, I'll have a link to it in the description box below. Also, a couple more appearances on a few podcasts coming up. I'll let you know as those get released as well. So with all that, let's get into today's mystery. This is one that I like to call the barrel. It's September 2nd, 1999, and Ronald Cohen bought a mid-century modern, split-level home in Jericho, New York. After moving his trash to the front yard for a trash company to come and pick up, he also included an old rusted 55-gallon drum that he found in this new home of his. This drum had sat, unnoticed, tucked inside a crawl space for years before Ronald started cleaning out the house. But while trash collectors picked up all of his other items, they left the barrel behind with a note saying that it was too heavy to move and it would need special pickup arrangements due to its weight and chemical markings. Not knowing who to call, this left Ronald with no choice but to open the barrel to see what was inside. Frustrated, he pried it open and was immediately overcome by a terrible, terrible stench. To his horror, among the various items and debris inside the barrel, he could see a withered, mummified hand and a lady's high-heeled shoe. He immediately called 911, and the barrel was picked up by local investigators and then transported to the Nassau County Coroner's Office for forensic examination. When coroners reopened the barrel, they could see the body was surrounded by heaping amounts of granular material, all of which was coated in a sticky, greenish chemical liquid. The remains were thoroughly mummified, with no organs or body fluids left, and they were dressed in 1960s-style women's clothing. The manner of death was determined to be a homicide after multiple lacerations to the head indicated she had died from blunt force trauma. This woman's mummified body would offer one more surprise for investigators, as they were shocked to discover that it also contained a male fetus. She had been killed within weeks or possibly even days before the baby would have been born. Some of the other items inside the barrel included 250 pounds of polystyrene pellets, a purse with a makeup kit, an address book, a wallet, a plastic flower stem with leaves, and green dye. Investigators had no way of identifying the woman. Fluids in the barrel had damaged the address book and wallet almost beyond repair. It would take time for digital examiners to piece together what information could be salvaged from those items. The only other place to start was with the barrel itself. Investigators were able to trace the drum back to a plastics factory called Melrose Plastics that was in operation in the 1960s. The co-owner of Melrose Plastics was a man named Howard Elkins. Mr. Elkins and his wife, Ruth, owned the house after it was initially built in 1957 for 12 years before selling it in 1972. Mr. and Mrs. Elkins no longer lived in Jericho, New York, but his old partner at the plastics factory did. He was able to point investigators to the Elkins retirement home in Boca Raton, Florida. As other leads were followed, Detective Sergeant Robert Edwards of the Nassau County Homicide Squad flew to Florida to question Mr. Elkins. On the morning of Thursday, September 9th, Sergeant Edwards questioned Howard Elkins about his involvement in Melrose Plastics, of which he had been principal owner until the 1970s. Tests had shown that the barrel and plastic flower stem had come from his company. The dye was also used at the time of the murder in the plastics industry. But without hesitation, he denied any knowledge of the barrel or its contents. Luckily, investigators had one more card to play. Mr. Elkins' former partner had also told police that during the late 60s, Elkins was rumored to have had an affair with a woman who worked for him. a woman with long black hair, just like that of the mummified remains. When confronted with this evidence, Mr. Elkins admitted to having an affair with a Spanish-speaking immigrant, but said he didn't remember her name or any details about her. With no other recourse, Sergeant Edwards asked for Mr. Elkins to provide the police with a swab of saliva for DNA samples. Mr. Elkins refused. Elkins, who was not charged or placed under arrest, then asked Sergeant Edwards to leave before his wife came home, so he could discuss the finding of the body and other sensitive issues with her. Edwards left the Elkins home and sought the help of the West Palm Beach County District Attorney's Office to obtain a search warrant for the DNA samples. On Friday, September 10th, 1999, he was notified that Mr. Elkins had killed himself, and Mr. Elkins did not leave a note behind. After his initial meeting with the sergeant, 70-year-old Elkins left the residence, promptly bought a 12-gauge shotgun and ammunition from Walmart, climbed into the back seat of his neighbor's car, and shot himself. From here, things moved quickly for investigators. A match to an immigrant identification number found inside the address book allowed detectives to finally give the body a name, and that name was Reyna Angelica Marroquin. In 1966, Reyna had left her home country of El Salvador after discovering that her husband had impregnated another woman. Heartbroken, Reyna decided to come to America to find the American dream. She wanted to study fashion and would live at a Catholic home that housed single women. Not long after arriving, she got a job working at the Melrose Plastics factory. The address book would yield two other clues. One was Elkins' name and number. The other was that of a woman who turned out to be a friend of Reyna's, and the woman was still alive and living in the area. Her name was Kathy Andrade, and she told investigators that she had been looking for her missing friend for 30 years. Kathy knew immediately that the body belonged to the friend that she had met in an English class, a woman that disappeared at the age of 27. At the time of her disappearance in 1969, Reyna had confided in Kathy that she'd not only been having an affair and had become pregnant, but told Kathy she also called the man's wife and told her about the affair and the baby. Reyna told Kathy that he called her back and was furious, going as far as even threatening to kill her. According to Kathy, Reyna never revealed the man's identity. However, she remembered that Reyna was absolutely terrified and realized immediately that calling his wife was a mistake. She asked her friend to come over, but when Kathy arrived, the house was empty, with warm food still on the table. Hours later, she contacted police, but with no information about Reyna or her family, police didn't know where to begin. She never saw or heard from her again. Through the years, the case went cold until the barrel's discovery was finally made. Sergeant Edwards believes that Elkins somehow lured Reyna to the plastics factory where he killed her. He then transported the body to his home and stuffed it into the barrel. His goal was most likely to carry the barrel aboard his boat so he could throw it out to sea. However, Howard Elkins underestimated how heavy the barrel would be once he weighed it down to make sure that it would sink. Unable to move it, Elkins shoved the barrel containing the body of Reyna Marroquin and his baby into the crawlspace, where it stayed while Elkins raised his children and carried on with his seemingly normal family life. The Jericho, New York house would be sold 2 more times before the grisly remains were found. Howard Elkins almost committed the perfect murder. 30 years later, DNA samples obtained from Elkins' body during his autopsy proved the baby did in fact belong to him, but there was still no way to prove he had killed Reyna. Luckily, the barrel would yield one more very important clue. A cryptic note was found inside Reyna's purse that simply read, "Don't be mad, I told the truth." Detective Edwards would go on to state, "We found a motive, we found a suspect, and I think the case is closed at this time." Reyna Marroquin's mother, who was found still alive in El Salvador, said she had recurring nightmares that her daughter was inside a barrel and had hoped for all those years that she would live long enough to find out what happened to her. When she was shown a 30-year-old photo of Reyna, she could only weep. Reyna was buried in El Salvador. Her mother died a month later and was buried with her. Now I know she's with me. She came flying like a dove back to her home. Case cracked. Wow, just another very tough and interesting case. It's interesting to see that a case in 1999, I'm wondering about DNA. What kind of role could DNA have played? And we know that they use DNA in terms of identifying that, yes, the baby is Elkins' child. But I was wondering about, wouldn't it have been great if we knew about DNA genealogy back then, and they could have taken a sample from Reyna's body as well and done some genealogy. Maybe that could have provided answers. And we're still not in a state where that's 100% perfect, but we're getting close. I went to a meeting recently, and they said that if we get 2% of the populations into something like GEDmatch, we'll be able to solve 90% of these cases that involve DNA. So the more and more people that contribute to those databases, the better and better odds are for solving crimes kind of like this. Another interesting turn in this story was the neighbor's car. I really wonder why Elkins would go and end his own life, especially with a shotgun in his neighbor's car. That almost sounds like there might have been some tough feelings going on there, or I don't know, perhaps he didn't want to do it in his home so that, his wife wouldn't have the memory of discovering him in that way. But I've never quite heard of something like that before. Backseat of a neighbor's car, very, very strange turn. And then, of course, near the end, just a very sweet sentiment in terms of Reyna's mother finding out what happened, being able to know the truth, and then passing away shortly after that and being laid to rest next to her daughter. I don't think that we can see happy endings very often in these episodes, but I do think that episode in particular is very sweet, and I'm happy that it ends that way. All right, now it's almost time to end this video with another sweet message from you amazing patrons. I want to thank several new patrons, as well as someone that increased their pledge. Let's start with that. Lauren Booth, thank you so much for increasing your pledge. And for new patrons, we have Paul Nowland, Victor Kornev, Janice Hammond, Patrick Bruneau, Devin Mulroy, Steve Pankey, and Jamie Barrington. Thank each and every one of you for donating to the channel. I truly appreciate it. It's great to have your support and help as YouTube is demonetizing more and more of my content. If you want to help the channel also, you can go to www.lordandarts.com. You can join Patreon. You could make PayPal donations. You can buy some merchandise. All of that helps the channel, helps keep me here doing what I love doing, spending time with all of you amazing people. Thank you so much. I'll see you back here on Wednesday with a brand new episode of Searchlight on the Lord and Arts channel.